The fire burned bright in the backyard, throwing wild shadows across the night. Abeni stood still, her heart pounding as she watched him feed their wedding photos into the flames. Each picture curled and blackened, faces melting into ash. The smell of smoke mixed with the faint memory of roses from their wedding day, still fresh in her mind. She felt her throat tighten, not from the heat but from disbelief. "Why?" she asked softly, her voice shaking. He looked at her and let out a cruel, empty laugh. "Because you're nothing without me," he said, his words cutting deeper than the fire ever could. Abeni didn't move. She just stood there, tears gathering in her eyes, a small, trembling smile forming on her lips. He thought she was breaking, but something inside her had started to change. The woman who once begged for his love was gone. In her chest, a quiet strength began to grow, slow, steady, unshakable. The flames hissed, the smoke rose, and his laughter echoed in her ears. But beneath that sound, another voice whispered inside her, "You are not his to destroy." That night, as the last photo turned to dust, Abeni made a promise, not to him but to herself. The fire had taken her memories, but it had also lit something new. It was the first spark of freedom, the kind that doesn't fade. And for the first time, she felt alive in the smoke of what once was. The days after the fire were slow and heavy. The mansion in Lagos felt too big, too quiet. Abeni moved through it like a shadow, her bare feet brushing across marble floors that once echoed with laughter. Every room carried pieces of the life she had built. The dinner table where they once held hands, the hallway where he used to wait with flowers, the balcony where she dreamed of forever. Now those memories clung to her like smoke, faint but suffocating. One morning, she stopped in front of the large wedding photo that still hung in the living room. It was the only one he hadn't burned. Her fingers trembled as she reached up, tracing the edge of the frame. In the picture, she looked happy, too happy, a woman who believed love would protect her. Abeni exhaled slowly and lifted the photo off the wall. She didn't smash it. She didn't cry. She simply set it down, whispering, "You can't destroy me by erasing the past." As she turned away, her eyes caught a pile of papers left on his desk. At first, she thought they were ordinary work files, but curiosity made her pause. Carefully, she flipped through them: bank statements, property deeds, and signed transfers. Her heart thudded when she saw another woman's name written beside his. A mistress. Another secret. She felt the sting in her chest, but instead of breaking, she stood taller. For the first time, she saw clearly who he truly was. Not a man in control, but a coward hiding behind lies. Abeni sat down, the papers spread before her like a confession. The pain that once made her weak now made her sharper. Every breath she took was steady, deliberate. The silence that filled the house no longer scared her, it surrounded her like armor. She realized she didn't need to shout or fight to win. She only needed to listen, to think, to wait. Outside, the rain began to fall softly against the windows. The world seemed to wash itself clean while she began to do the same. The storm inside her was no longer chaos. It was preparation. She folded the papers neatly, placing them back where they were. She wasn't ready to act yet. Not tonight. But soon. Very soon. And as she walked through the empty halls, her reflection in the mirror caught her eye. For the first time, she didn't see a broken woman. She saw a spark, quiet but fierce. Her silence was no longer weakness. It was power waiting to strike. That morning, Lagos felt heavy with clouds. The air smelled like rain, and the streets buzzed with quiet urgency. Abeni stood in front of the bank's tall glass doors for a long moment, her heart calm but steady, her navy dress hugging her like armor. People brushed past her, businessmen, mothers, students. But she wasn't just another face in the crowd. She was a woman walking toward freedom. Inside, the marble floors were smooth and cold under her heels. The sound of her footsteps echoed softly through the hall. Every step reminded her of how far she had come from the trembling woman who once stood by a fire, watching her memories burn. She reached the front desk, her voice soft but clear. "I'd like to see the manager, please." When she entered his office, the manager stood up quickly, surprise flashing in his eyes. "Mrs. Alan Ruaju," he greeted warmly, almost nervously. Everyone in Lagos knew her name, the wife of the powerful businessman, the woman who always smiled at charity events and never spoke too loudly. Abeni smiled faintly, her eyes calm. "Not for long," she said quietly, sitting down across from him. From her handbag she pulled out a neat folder and placed it on his desk. The papers inside glowed faintly under the office lights, legal documents, signatures, proof of ownership. "I need this transfer process today," she said. Her voice didn't shake. The manager glanced down at the file, his brows furrowing as he realized what it was. The deed to their home, the same house her husband believed was his alone. He hesitated, lowering his voice. "Does your husband know about this?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Abeni lifted her eyes to meet his, and for a second the world seemed to go still. "He will," she said simply, her tone carrying both sorrow and quiet pride. She didn't need to explain. The papers said enough. The pen felt cold in her hand as she signed her name with a slow, deliberate curve. The sound of the rain outside grew stronger, drumming against the windows as if the sky itself wanted to speak for her. She smiled softly, not at the manager, but at the version of herself who had once been afraid to make this choice. When she walked out of the bank, the rain touched her skin, cool and gentle. She didn't run for shelter. She let it wash over her face, clearing away everything she no longer needed to carry. For the first time in a long while, Abeni didn't feel trapped. She felt clean, alive, and untouchable. The house was quiet that evening, almost too quiet. The smell of dinner floated through the air, spiced jollof rice, grilled chicken, fried plantain. It was his favorite meal, one she hadn't cooked in months. When he opened the door, his tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled, and the faint scent of another woman's perfume clung to his skin. He didn't notice how still the house felt, how calm she looked as she placed the last dish on the table. "You cooked," he said with a grin, hanging his jacket carelessly on the chair. Abeni looked up and smiled softly. "I did," she said. Her voice was smooth, her face unreadable. He poured himself a glass of wine, swirling it lazily before taking a sip. "You're quiet tonight," he said, his tone playful, testing. "I've been thinking," she replied, her eyes focused on her plate. "About us?" he asked, smirking as if he already knew the answer. "No," she said simply, lifting her gaze to meet his. "About freedom." Something in her voice made him pause. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. He tried to laugh, but the sound didn't come out as strong as before. "Freedom," he repeated. "You sound dramatic." Abeni smiled again, that same small, calm smile that made him uneasy. "Do you remember the night you burned our photos?" she asked quietly. He blinked, his hand tightening around the wine glass. "Of course," he said. "You were hysterical." Her eyes glistened in the soft light, but her tone stayed steady. "I remember," she said. "And while you were burning my memories, I was learning something important." She paused, letting the silence stretch between them. Then she added, "You were right about one thing. I'm nothing without you because I'm more than you ever saw." He frowned, confused, uneasy. "What are you talking about?" he asked, trying to sound in control. Abeni leaned back, her expression calm, almost kind. "You burned our photos, but today," she said, her voice low but sharp, "I burned your name off the deed." For a second, he didn't react. Then the words sank in. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the floor, red wine spreading across the marble like spilled blood. The silence that followed was heavy, thick enough to choke on. He stared at her, face pale, words lost somewhere between anger and disbelief. But Abeni didn't flinch. She simply stood up, walked past the broken glass and said softly, "Dinner's getting cold." Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, each one strong and final. Behind her, the only sound left was the drip of wine on tile, and the echo of a man realizing he had already lost her. The walls trembled with his voice. His anger filled the room like smoke, choking the air. He shouted her name, slammed his fists against the table, and demanded answers she no longer owed him. "After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me," he bellowed. Abeni stood by the window, her hands clasped together, her back straight. She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. His rage no longer frightened her. It only reminded her why she was leaving. He paced the floor like a storm, eyes wild, voice shaking. "You can't survive without me," he roared, veins standing out in his neck. "You're nothing without me, Abeni. Nothing." For a moment his words hit her chest, heavy and familiar. They used to make her crumble, but not this time. Slowly she turned to face him. Her eyes glistened with tears, but her face was calm. "You already proved I can't survive with you," she said softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through his shouting like a blade through silk. He stared at her, stunned, unsure how to respond to her quiet strength. Then, in a sudden burst of anger, he took a step forward and reached for her arm. Abeni stepped back quickly, trembling but firm. "Don't," she whispered, her voice shaking but steady enough to make him freeze. "You lost the right to touch me when you burned my memories." Her words hung between them, heavy, final. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The sound of the ceiling fan hummed above them, the only thing breaking the silence. He looked at her, and for the first time he didn't see the woman who used to beg or cry. He saw someone else entirely, someone he couldn't control, someone whose strength came from the very pain he had caused. Abeni wiped her tears with the back of her hand and took a deep breath. They weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of release, washing away the last bit of fear that had tied her to him. "You can scream all you want," she said quietly, "but I'm done listening." Her voice was calm, steady, certain. He tried to speak again, but no words came. His anger turned to confusion, then to something close to fear. Abeni picked up her bag from the chair, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked past him, her perfume mixing with the smell of his rage. The door clicked softly behind her as she stepped out. Inside, he stood alone, surrounded by the echo of his own fury, and the ghost of a woman who had finally set herself free. 2 weeks passed, and the silence inside the mansion had become unbearable. The house that once echoed with Abeni's laughter now felt like a museum of ghosts. The curtains were gone, the walls bare. Even her perfume, once soft in the air, had vanished. He sat on the couch, staring at the cold marble floor, waiting for the sound of her footsteps that would never come again. Every corner of the house whispered her absence, too quiet, too still, too final. That morning, a knock echoed through the emptiness. He hesitated before opening the door. A courier stood outside, dressed neatly, holding a brown envelope with practiced politeness. "Documents for Mr. Alanruaju," the man said. He signed the paper without thinking and closed the door slowly. The house swallowed him again as he tore the seal open. Inside were neatly arranged papers, official, clean, merciless. The first line made his throat dry: petition for divorce. He flipped through the pages with shaking hands. There it was again, her signature, bold and steady. The same name he once made her take, now written as a symbol of independence. Behind it were property transfer confirmations, account closures, title documents, all of them with his name crossed out, replaced by hers. Every page was another reminder that she had erased him completely, not from anger, but from strength. His chest tightened as he dropped the papers onto the table. He grabbed his phone, dialing her number quickly, his fingers trembling. The line rang once before the cold voice of the network operator replied, "The number you are trying to reach is no longer in service." He tried again. Nothing. The silence mocked him. He looked around the room. Her favorite chair was gone, the picture frames were empty, and the scent of her rose oil had been replaced by dust. The television sat unplugged, the kitchen untouched. Everything she had once brought to life had gone with her. For the first time, he realized that the house wasn't really his. It had always been hers, filled with her warmth, her laughter, her soul. Without her, it was just walls and emptiness. He sank onto the couch, the papers scattered at his feet, staring blankly ahead. The weight of his choices pressed down on him. He had wanted control, but all he had left was silence. Abeni had left him exactly what he gave her: ashes. The house still stood, but everything that made it a home was gone. And for the first time, he understood what true loss felt like. Months had passed, but the emptiness in his house hadn't changed. The silence still clung to the walls, heavy and cold. He had tried to fill it with noise, with parties, with new faces, but nothing lasted. Every laugh sounded forced, every smile fake. Then one morning, as he waited in a cafe, something caught his eye on the newspaper stand. There she was, her face, Abeni, her name printed in bold letters across the glossy cover of a magazine. Abeni Alanruaju, the woman who built her empire from ashes. For a moment he couldn't move. He stared at the picture as if it might disappear. She looked different, yet completely the same. Her eyes had that same deep calm, but now they held light, pure, steady confidence. She wore a white suit, elegant and powerful, standing in front of a beautiful new house. The caption beneath the photo made his stomach twist. "Some men burn bridges. I burned a cage." He slammed the magazine shut, but the words stayed in his mind, echoing louder with every heartbeat. His chest felt tight. He could almost hear her voice again, the way she used to whisper his name with love, and the way she stopped when her heart finally broke. He had thought she would fall apart without him. Instead, she had risen higher than he ever dreamed possible. He picked the magazine back up, flipping through the pages. There were photos of her speaking at events, standing beside investors, smiling with children from her charity foundation. Her story was everywhere: how she rebuilt her life, how she started her business from nothing, how she became a symbol of strength for women across Nigeria. The interviewer had written, "She lost everything once but found herself in the ashes. Now she owns her story." His reflection stared back at him from the shiny page, older, duller, empty. For the first time he saw himself the way she must have seen him, small. The success, the power, the money, all meaningless now that the woman who had made his world warm was gone. Somewhere miles away, Abeni stood before a mirror of her own, adjusting her earrings before heading to a conference. She caught a glimpse of her reflection and smiled, softly but for real this time. The kind of smile that comes when the pain has turned to purpose. She didn't need revenge or validation. She had peace. She had herself. And as the flash of cameras surrounded her, Abeni walked forward with the grace of someone who had walked through fire and learned how to shine in its light. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that holds both peace and memory. Abeni stood before the ruins of what used to be her home, the place where everything had begun and ended. The walls were cracked, the windows shattered, and the air still carried a faint trace of smoke. She took a slow breath and stepped inside, her heels crunching softly over broken glass. Each step brought back flashes of laughter, tears, arguments, and love that had once filled these rooms. Her fingers brushed against the faded walls, tracing the marks that once framed their wedding photo. The house was silent now, but in that silence she could still hear the ghost of her own laughter, the echo of who she used to be. Abeni reached into her bag and pulled out the only photograph she had kept, a picture of herself in her wedding dress, smiling brightly, full of hope. She looked at it for a long time, her eyes soft but strong. Kneeling down, she placed the photo gently on the ground. "You burned our past," she whispered, her voice calm, almost tender. "But you also lit my future." Her hand trembled slightly as she struck a match. The flame flared to life, small and fragile at first, then steady and warm. She watched it for a moment before letting it fall onto the picture. The edges curled, the colors melted, and soon the flame began to grow. Abeni stood there, her face glowing in the light, her heart lighter than it had ever been. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. As she turned and walked away, the fire behind her rose higher, not in destruction, but in rebirth. It was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of her freedom.